We're learning the second Sikha on Parsha Shoftim in Chelek on page 104. The Shir today is being learned L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin and Rabbi Menashe Koltman. Nachdem wie der Rambam rechnet uns bepratis alle mitzvahs in der Akdame von Sifrei Yada Chazake, after the Rambam counts in detail all of the mitzvahs in his introduction to his Sefer Yada Chazake, is there Mamshech, the Rambam continues and says, Eileheim Taryag mitzvahs shenemru lo Moshe misinai. These are the 613 mitzvahs that were commanded to Moshe at Har Sinai. Hein ukol yisein uprotisein chulu, which includes all of the mitzvahs in general and all of the details as well. Yesh mitzvahs acheres. There are additional mitzvahs shenischatshu achre matan Torah that were added after Matan Torah, v'kavo oisan neviim v'chachamim, and they were established by the prophets and by our sages, upashtu b'chol Yisrael, and they spread and are fulfilled by all Yidden. Kagayim, for example, Mikra Megillah, reading the Megillah on Purim, v'ner Chanukah, lighting Chanukah candles on Chanukah, v'tainis, Tisha B'Av, fasting on Tisha B'Av, v'erevin, the mitzvah of putting up an erev on Shabbos, v'yadayim chulu, and washing hands for eating bread. Kol leilu mitzvahs shenischatshu, all these mitzvahs that were added by the sages, chayavim anu lekablam u'lishamram, we are obligated to accept them and keep them. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, loisasser min hadava v'chulu, do not move away from any of these matters that the sages in all generations will teach you and will establish. Tzarech bior. So now what needs to be explained regarding this category of mitzvahs that the Chachamim came and added. Als was the Rambam schreibt is betachlis adiyuk. We know that everything that the Rambam writes is very precise. Und when bringt bechibure kame and yonim is as in mesakim u mefaret. When the Rambam brings in his sefer different subjects and there's a few details, he usually itemizes them and then gives us a number. As we can see clearly regarding the way the Rambam puts things for all of the halachas that he brings in the Sefer of Rambam. And as ich mistapik mit dem, was there is magdim, the Rambam does not just stop by this, that he gives the introduction and says that that I divided this Sefer in halachas for each subject, and then va'achalaka halachas leprakim shabaysinyan. In each halacha there are the prakim that includes the details. And then v'chol perik and perik achalakos halachas ketanos kadeshi yizdurim al peh. And then in each perik there's the individual halacha of that perik, so that it should be all organized and clearly you can learn it and study it and know it bal peh. Nor additionally, it is a main of a sefer. The Rambam also, besides organizing it very, very clearly, he also counts, gives a number for all the details that he writes. Noch in Oster in the mitzvahs, after the Rambam counts all the mitzvahs, he writes, I divided this sefer into 14 svarim. And he explains what the content of each sefer is and its name, and gives it a number, exactly how many halachas each sefer has. Sefer Amada, for example, regarding the first sefer of the Rambam, Sefer Amada, Hilchos of Chamesh, V'zeh Siduran. There's 5 different halachas, and he goes through the Seder, beginning with Hilchos Yisod Torah and concluding with Hilchos Tshuva. Al derech zeh, b'negeya leminyan mitzvahs, just like the Rambam itemizes and gives a number for all the details in his Sefer in general, similar is also regarding the number of mitzvahs. Kishem v'yeres medayik tzegeben, the mitzvah kloli von alle mitzvahs shel Torah, just like the Rambam gives the number of all mitzvahs of the Torah, at the end of his introduction, before he counts all the mitzvahs. So the Rambam writes, minyan mitzvahs the number of the mitzvahs in the Torah that are in all generations is sheish meis fleishesre mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs. Mehem mitzvahs asay, masayim v'arba'am mishmayna similem chulu. Out of the 613, 248 is the positive commandments. The 365 is the negative commandments. And the Rambam repeats this number in a few places. Now, besides this general number regarding all mitzvahs, the Mispa Klali from the mitzvahs. Before each one of the sections of halachas, the Rambam gives the general number of mitzvahs, and the Mispa Prati, the Esse, and the individual number of how much is the positive and negative commandments, was the halacha and alten sich, that will be explained in these halachas. And as an example, Hilchas Yisedi HaTorah, the first halachas in the Rambam writes, Yesh b'chlalan esse mitzvahs. There are 10 mitzvahs here. Sheish mitzvahs aseh, ve'arba mitzvahs loisaseh. 6 are mitzvahs aseh, and 4 loisaseh. On his mamshech v'zeh pratan chulu, and then he itemizes them what they are in detail. And that is chayzer u'mesakim b'siyim from jeden from the Yodal Tzfarim. And then the Rambam repeats again, and he concludes after each one of the 14 Sfarim, their mispa klali u'prati from the mitzvah shabai, the general and more individual number of all the mitzvahs that there are contained in this sefer. There are 75 mitzvahs explained in Sefer Amada. 16 mitzvahs aseh, 16 mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs leisaseh, and 59 are mitzvahs leisaseh. So we can see to what extent the Rambam was so organized in his Sefer Hayad, and also in giving numbers specifically for all mitzvahs, for every individual section of mitzvahs, and so on. So based on all of this, what's required to explain here is, why doesn't the Rambam here write for us? As the Rambam soll ergens in Sifrei Hayad angeben, der Mispar von die mitzvahs, welche seine mit divrei seifrim. Nowhere in his sefer does the Rambam give us a number for the mitzvahs that the sages throughout generations added. Why does the Rambam not give, like he does regarding everything else, give us a number for these mitzvahs? Now, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, sagt the Rambam writes in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, wenn fragt, auf das Bahag, weil rechnet gewisse mitzvahs der Rabbanan, in Minyan HaMitzvahs, the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedalis, he also counts all mitzvahs of the Torah and itemizes them. And the Rambam asks on the Bahag that some of the mitzvahs that he counts are not min ha-Torah, it's mitzvahs min Rabbanan. In Nimna kol esse Rabbanan, v'chol lois esse Rabbanan, if you will count every positive and negative commandment that the Chachamim added, yi ez ha'oile la'alofim rabim. So then it's not going to be 630 mitzvahs. You're going to come to many thousands of additional mitzvahs that the Chachamim added. So therefore the Rambam says we do not count those mitzvahs midrabanan as part of the number of 613, the mitzvahs min ha-Torah. So therefore, that's simply the reason why the Rambam doesn't give a number for the mitzvahs midrabanan, because it's a number which is alafim rabim, many of thousands of details that Chachamim added to the mitzvahs of Torah. Men kann aber nicht sagen, as mitam zeh, sagt nicht der Rambam der Misbah von mitzvahs midrabanan. This cannot, however, be the reason why the Rambam does not give a number for these mitzvahs that are from the sages, midrabanan. Weil, because Aleph, number 1, adarabah. On the contrary, we bald the misbar is a groß. If this number is such a large number, is doch then noch mehr nötig zu sagen sei misbar. So it's actually even more necessary to give a number. Warum das helft sei alle zu wissen und gedenken, because that will help you know what all these mitzvahs are and to remember all of them. Nachmer, furthermore, al pi divrei Rambam legabe di taryag mitzvahs, based on what the Rambam himself says regarding the 613 mitzvahs, the tam was that as a mefaret umayne b'chol halacha v'halacha. Why does he itemize and count the mitzvahs that are included in every section of halachas? In order to be sure that I will not miss any detail when he speaks about all the mitzvahs. When you give a number, so that guarantees that you know that this is the number, and if it doesn't fit with the number you have, you know you're missing something. So if so, is shayich unaitig oich unachmer legabe mitzvahs derabanan. If that's the point of giving the number to make sure you're not leaving anything out, then it's even more necessary regarding the mitzvahs derabanan when there are so many thousands of details. So it's necessary to have a number to know that you're not leaving any details out. There is another point, ve'ikir, and the main point here, the shaila, vavas erzählt sie nicht, is wegen die mitzvahs derabanan bechlalusan. Why wouldn't the Rambam count the mitzvahs midrabanan in their general sense? Not every small itemized detail. Al derech v'the Rambam rechen zei da. as the Rambam himself here, as quoted before, counts Kagay Mikra Megillah, V'ner Chanukah, V'tainis Tisha B'Av, V'Erevin, V'Yadayim. So the Rambam counts here these mitzvahs that are the general mitzvahs that Chachamim added, Unit Benegeh Zeir Pratim. But each individual detail of these mitzvahs does not have to be counted. So maybe the thousands of details that Rambam is speaking about is when you look into the details of every mitzvah. But here the question is, why wouldn't the Rambam give a number to the general mitzvahs that Chachamim added? Additionally, and another main point here is the shaila is b'negeya abazun desug in divrei seifrim gufa. Our question is only addressing a certain category in those details that Chachamim came and added. The mitzvahs, was sie haben mechadish und mesaken given. We're speaking specifically about mitzvahs that they added and instituted. Nicht die Gzeiris v'siyagim, was sie haben zugegeben und reingegeben in mitzvahs d'oraisa. We're not talking about those additional decrees or precautions that Chachamim added all within the fulfillment of mitzvahs min ha-Torah, where Chachamim added details of how it should be done. Other minhagos v'chayetze b'zeh, or additional customs that Chachamim added. That's not our question. The question is about mitzvahs that Chachamim added. Und der Sog von mitzvahs mit divrei seifrim is doch b'mispar mugbul umuet. This category of mitzvahs is actually limited and is much less. Ubekama mekaimis werden gerechnet zayin mitzvahs derabanan v'sulai. All that's counted in many places is that there's 7 mitzvahs that Chachamim added and not more than 7. So it's very simple for the Rambam to give this number, 7 mitzvahs. Why does the Rambam not give us the number of the mitzvahs midrabanan? So seemingly, we could simply explain this according to what the Rambam himself says regarding how we define mitzvahs midrabanan. The Rambam tells us, as kol ma shetzivonu chachamim lasais, everything that chachamim commanded to fulfill, v'chol ma shehizirunu mimenu, and everything that they warned us not to do, kvar tziva, we are already commanded in the Torah la'asaisai, that we have to follow this. V'hu amrei, and this is what it says in the Torah, al pi ha-Torah asher yerucha v'gaimer, that you should follow according to the Torah that the chachamim will teach you. That's a mitzvah saseh. And also, v'hizirani yizbarach ma'aver dava mikol ma shetiknu isai. We are warned not to transgress and to not listen to anything that Chachamim instituted, or gazru, or they decreed. And v'omar, the pasuk says, lo yisasur. Do not move away from anything Chachamim say. So that's a mitzvah saseh. This is what the Rambam writes in his Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Rambam speaks about this also at length in the beginning of Hilchas Mamrim. Now, the Ramban is masika of the Divrei Rambam und fragt kama v'kama kushis. The Ramban argues on this Rambam and he asks a number of questions. Ubenayim, and amongst the questions he asks, if for every mitzvah that Chachamim added, there's both a lav and an esed that you must fulfill this, hat man gedacht macht me sein in alle inyanim midrabanan. So then we should be stringent in all matters that Chachamim added, as much as we are stringent with any mitzvah min ha-Torah. Why do we define that this is divided in 2 categories and there are differences between a mitzvah that is min ha-Torah and a mitzvah that the Chachamim added later? If the fulfilling, the mitzvah to fulfill those mitzvahs midrabanan is a mitzvah saseh, and a mitzvah loisaser, so it should be in the same category as all mitzvahs min ha-Torah. So one of the answers to this question that the commentaries say, if one does not fulfill a positive mitzvah that Chachamim added, or he transgresses on one of those things that Chachamim said is forbidden, is meladas Rambam nit over auf der mitzvah von al pi ha-Torah asher yerucha oder auf lav leisaser. Even in the Rambam's opinion that says that you must follow what the Chachamim said, he will not transgress, not on the mitzvah saseh and not on the mitzvah leisaser of leisaser. Nor blois dan wenn man is nit mekabel di mitzvah. Only when the person is not accepting the mitzvah from the Chachamim, other than issa d'Rabbanan, or what they said is forbidden. When there is nit meide in divrei Chachamim, if he's not agreeing to what Chachamim say, if a person comes along and has his own opinion and does not accept what Chachamim is saying, that's when he's moving away and not following what Chachamim are teaching, then he's over on this mitzvah saseh and mitzvah leisoser. Das heißt, in other words, this means the mitzvah al pi ha-Torah asher yerucha und the lav von leisoser. Both the mitzvah and the lav that you have to listen to what Chachamim say is nicht der etzem ton or the nitton das was the Chachamim haben besaken given. Fulfilling this does not apply to the very action itself, whether you do or do not do what Chachamim said. That's something that you're doing because Chachamim said so. When does the person, when is he being over what the Torah said? Nor the mitzvah is l'shmoya mikol bezn hagadol sheyamdu lehem liyisrael. The mitzvah is that one has to listen, achiv to folgen the Chachamim, to listen and to follow what Chachamim say. So if one is not fulfilling an individual mitzvah, but he's accepting what Chachamim said, but for whatever reason, he's not fulfilling this mitzvah, then he's not being over on the mitzvah min ha-Torah. If a person argues and does not accept what Chachamim say, then he's being over on the mitzvah of the Torah. Only the Rambam is masber the nusach ha-bracha. The Rambam explains this idea also when he speaks about the bracha that we say regarding mitzvahs, asher kedushana b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu by mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. And we say this bracha regarding mitzvahs d'Rabbanan as well. V'heichan sivanu b'Torah. Where are we commanded to fulfill the mitzvahs that the Chachamim added? Shekasav ba, the Torah says, asher yoimru l'chatasa, that you have to listen to what Chachamim say. Nimtza inyan advarim v'atzon kachu. So therefore, the way to understand what we say in the bracha is as follows: Asher kedushanu b'mitzvaysav, shetziva behen l'shmoya me'elu shetzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. That we are thanking Hashem for sanctifying us and giving us the mitzvah. And what is the mitzvah? Not the individual action that you're fulfilling now, but the mitzvah to listen to what Chachamim commanded in lighting Chanukah candles, or likras Megillah, or reading the Megillah, v'chein shar kol ha-mitzvah shemedivrei Sofrim, or any of the other mitzvahs. So it comes out from this, as the mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, sind nicht eingeteilt in besondere mitzvahs. The way to define all the mitzvahs that Chachamim added is not that they're divided in separate, each one is a separate mitzvah for itself. Nor alle mitzvahs sind nichlal in ein mitzvah. All of the mitzvahs midrabanan are included in one mitzvah. L'shmoya cholu, only saser, to follow, to listen, and not to move away from what Chachamim are teaching. Nachmer zagim mefarshim, commentaries add a point even further. As geshein vi isuri drabanan zen alekamedeis nit isuri chefza. Just as it is when it comes to things that Chachamim said are forbidden, so according to some opinions, the Isser, the prohibition, is not on the object itself. Not Isuri Gavra. Chachamim are speaking to the person and telling the person how to behave, that he should stay away from this object and so on. But the object itself remains as is. Al derech zeh is oich by the mitzvahs midrabanan, so similar could be said regarding the mitzvahs the Chachamim command to fulfill, as is in dem chefze. The mitzvahs does not pertain to the object itself, nor is it an achiyuv oifen gavra. It's an obligation that lies on the person, the action that he has to do. So therefore, the mitzvahs are not divided, that there's this object, there's another object, and each thing is separate. So therefore, based on this, we could say, as the far zokt mit der Rambam, am mispar mitzvahs der Rabbanon, zayin mitzvahs v'chayetze bezeh. This is the reason why the Rambam does not give the number of seven mitzvahs or any number similar. Kedei madgish zayin das gufe, because this is to highlight this very point there. As mitzvahs der Rabbanon, zene nit eisgeteilt jeder bifnei atzmai, that by the mitzvahs midrabanan, they are not each individual. Als a bazunda mitzvah, that each one is a separate mitzvah that you're obligated to fulfill. Says nitchal a bazunda shem mitzvah of yed mitzvah medivrei seifrim. There is no separate title of a mitzvah, that there's this mitzvah and then another mitzvah, and each with its own individual object. Hayais as the alle mitzvahs zene nichlal in ein mitzvah, because all mitzvahs are really one point included in one mitzvah, which is folgin. The Rabbanon to listen, to follow what Chachamim say, and not to move away from their words. Therefore, it's really all one point. And as an example for this, like when it comes to one that has to listen and follow to the directions of a doctor, which is according to Shulchan Aruch. You're obligated to fulfill what a doctor says because of the pasuk that says that you have to be careful and take care of your health. So we will not divide every individual action or whatever it is that a person is careful with it for his health, that it's a separate mitzvah. It's all one point. Taking care of your health. The Yisayim Mizu, another example even more, al derech kiyam hapratim for mitzvahs kibbud aveim. Fulfilling all the details of honoring one's father and mother. There are many details that go into this, but it's all the fulfillment of one mitzvah, expressing the honor to a parent. So therefore here as well, the mitzvahs, midrabanan, is all one point. Listen to what the sages are telling you and follow them. And all details of every individual mitzvah is that one and same point. So therefore the Rambam doesn't give any number. However, the Rabbi continues, we cannot answer and say that this is the reason why the Rambam does not give a number. Because as es legt sich nicht zu sagen, as der Rambam soll mishane sein von Darkei v'sidrei b'chol ha-sefer kulei. It's not logical to say that the Rambam would change from his style in the entire Sefer of Rambam. Sefer umayne di prati advarim v'anyanim und sagt euch sehr sachakel. The Rambam counts every detail and gives us the total of what he is explaining. All just a hint, a point here about how we should define the mitzvahs midrabanan. Ubefrat, as das ist ein Inyan Ikri, was hat es gedarft sagen befeirish. If this is true, that the Rambam understands mitzvahs midrabanan the way we're defining it here, that it's really all one point, so then this is a very fundamental point that the Rambam should spell out somewhere clearly in a sefer. So is, in addition to this, Aleph number 1, the etzem hanoche, as by the mitzvahs, isurim the rabbanon, is ladas Rambam the mitzvah nit the meise, nor the shmias divrei chachamim. This idea that according to the Rambam, what is the concept of a mitzvah mid rabbanon? It's not the action itself that has a name mitzvah on it. The point of the mitzvah is the fact that you're following, you're listening to what chachamim says. Is tzarech in gadol. This is very difficult to accept. There are those that explain the Rambam this way, but there are many that argue. And as will be pointed out here, that it's very difficult to accept that this is the Rambam's opinion. The example brought before, when you have the directions of a doctor and all the details is not counted as a separate fulfillment of a mitzvah. It's all one point of listening to the doctor. It's not a good example for our case. The medical advice you're getting from a doctor, they are not words of Torah. The Torah says to listen to what the doctor says. Here though, all the details that Chachamim teach in every individual mitzvah is in general a part of the words of Torah. It's not just like advice, of medical advice. These are words of Chachamim which are part of Torah itself. Und wie bald, als sie seinen a Chelek ve'ikir from Torah Shebal Peh, so since all of the mitzvahs of the Chachamim are a part of, and a main part of the Torah Shebal Peh, is moving, so it's understood as Eich Kiyuman, so also their fulfillment, V'kiyum mitzvahs mikra Megillah al derech bashal, when one fulfills the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, for example, is Eich apitayre med ha'iraisa amaisa shel mitzvah. So even min ha'Torah, we should define the action itself being done as an act of a mitzvah. The mitzvah is not nit blois akiyum from dem tzivi aklolu l'shmai divrei chachamim. And it's not only the fact that he's listening to what chachamim are saying, and therefore the mitzvah, the action itself is not an action of a mitzvah. It's not logical. It makes much more sense to say that the act that he's doing, or in this case reading the Megillah, it itself is defined as a mitzvah. There is another point here. Akapanim kemenid zagin as das is kavanas harambam da madgish zayin otem inyan in mitzvahs derabanan. Whatever it is, here, if you look into the words of the Rambam, we cannot say that this is the point of the Rambam by not counting the number of mitzvahs to make this point about mitzvahs derabanan, that it's all really one point of listening to the Chachamim. Warum? The Rambam is doch weiter mamshich bavarint wie die mitzvahs Einam Tosefes al mitzvahs hatayra. The Rambam continues and explains Why do we not consider the mitzvahs that Chachamim added that they are adding to the mitzvahs that the Torah says? And one may not add, Bal Taisef, you may not add to the mitzvahs of the Torah. And the Rambam says as follows: Chachamim add, and they institute or they teach us what has to be fulfilled. This is not considered adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah. When Chachamim instituted these things, it didn't say that it's Hashem that commanded to build the Eruv or read the Megillah. If that's what Chachamim said, then they're adding to the Torah, and that's part of the Isser of Bal Taisef. Rather, this is what we're saying. Shahanavim in Bezdin, that the prophets with their Bezdin, they instituted this. And they instituted to read the Megillah in its time for the reason that to celebrate Purim. So this is the Rambam's explanation for why the mitzvahs of the Nevi'im and the Chachamim is not an addition to Torah. Now, if we're going to accept the point that we said before, that it's really all mitzvahs midrabanan are really all one point, which is in the pasuk of Leis Saser, to listen to what Chachamim say is das milchatchila ken kashin it. So then this whole question about Chachamim adding to the Torah is not a question in the first place. The Rambam Gufa is doch madgish. The mitzvahs sagt nicht kein mispar for mitzvahs derabanan. The Rambam is highlighting this point by not giving a number to the mitzvahs derabanan. As mitzvahs derabanan sind nicht zerteilt als besondere mitzvahs. That these mitzvahs are not divided in different numbers of mitzvahs. No, they alle sind ein klolesige mitzvah deraisa. They're all included just in the one mitzvah min ha-Torah, folgen derabanan. To follow and not to move away from the words of the Chachamim. Is doch moving bepashtus, so it's simply understood as this is nidokin kasol kedaitoch, as es zugekommen al yedei zeh ahisofe in mispar mitzvahs. There's no reason to think in the first place that there's anything being added to the number of mitzvahs of the Torah. On a darf nicht verämpfern, there's no need for the Rambam to address and to answer the einam taisvus al mitzvahs of Torah, why it's not adding. It's not a contradiction to the mitzvah or the law that the Torah says not to add to the Torah. So therefore we must say, as the phone Gufa was the Rambam darf doch gleich bewarnen as einam tosefes al mitzvahs Torah. The Rambam has to clarify and explain why the mitzvahs midrabanan are not adding to the mitzvahs min Torah is muchach. So from this itself, it's clear as adarabah that the opposite is true. Teichen dvarav da vegem mitzvahs derabanan is the content of the words of the Rambam here about the mitzvahs midrabanan is telling us as is an nita kiyum von ein mitzvah min Torah, that they're not all a fulfillment of just one mitzvah min Torah. Shmiyas divrei chachamim, following what the chachamim say, nor fakert. The opposite is true. Nach mitzvahs bedaimet zu mitzvahs Torah. The chachamim are adding additional mitzvahs similar to the mitzvahs of the Torah. Was jede mitzvah is me mechuyev mekayim zayin. Every individual mitzvah is an obligation to fulfill. Chiyuv al pi Torah, and it's an obligation to fulfill them according to Torah. And therefore the Rambam has to come and clarify why it's not Bal Taisef, why it's not adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah. And this is also clear from the words of the Rambam himself, where he says, Eilahem taryag mitzvahs. There are 613 mitzvahs. V'yesh mitzvahs acheres shenischatshu acha matan Torah. There are more mitzvahs that were added after Matan Torah, and v'yesh l'chol mitzvah u'mitzvah me'elu pirushim v'dikdukim. Each one of these mitzvahs have many details. Kol elu ha'mitzvahs shenischatshu. All these mitzvahs that were added, chayavim anu lekablam u'l'shamrim cholu. We must accept them and keep them. Das heißt, es sind andere besondere mitzvahs. The way that Rambam defines what Chachamim added, he defines them as mitzvahs, new mitzvahs. Nit kein pratim ha'kolulim in the mitzvahs ha'teira le'saser. He doesn't define them just as details, which are part of one general mitzvah to follow what Chachamim say. But in demselben Sug together from the friedige taryag mitzvahs ha'teira that are already included in the 613 mitzvahs. These are new mitzvahs that are added after Matan Torah. Und der Rebbe fordert sich gleich zu bewahren, as auf Apikein, einem Teisas al mitzvah Torah. That's why it's necessary for the Rambam to immediately clarify why is this not adding more mitzvahs to the Torah. So if so, v'hodra kushile duchte. The original question comes back, v'vaz sagt nit der Rambam, der Misper von den mitzvahs acherois shenischatshu. Now that we see clearly in the words of the Rambam that the mitzvahs that Chachamim added are defined as new individual mitzvahs, why does he not give us the number of these mitzvahs? So the answer for this is as follows. In them was the Rambam is medayik v'choizer u'meineda, the mitzvah, the mispar, mitzvahs de'iraisa. The Rambam is very specific in counting, and he counts again the mitzvahs minat Torah. As we see this twice, Sai betchilas dvarov, in the beginning of his words, he says, Eleim taryag mitzvahs chulu. These are the 613 mitzvahs. And Azayach behemshich dvarov, whereas Mazbe Kanal, the mitzvahs de Rabbanan. In the continuation, where the Rambam explains why it is that the mitzvahs that Chachamim added, ein einam tesefas al mitzvahs ha-Torah. They're not adding to the Torah. And then he says, V'al ma'as hira Torah le'seisef olav le'sigra mimenu. What does the Torah mean that you shouldn't add or take away from a mitzvah? That a prophet is not allowed to come and say that Hashem commanded to add to the Torah, or to minimize of any of the 613 mitzvahs. So the Rambam counts again, the number is 613. In the mitzvahs medivrei seifrim. And he very specifically does not give a number for the mitzvahs that Chachamim added. And then Gufa, dem chiluk zwischen mitzvahs shel Torah and mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. This itself expresses the difference between the mitzvahs minat Torah and the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. The mitzvahs d'Oraisa zene b'minyan u'mispar u'misuyim v'kavua. The mitzvahs minat Torah is with a very specific number that is set, that cannot be changed. This is a command that you may not add or minimize from the mitzvahs. As the Rambam says, this is something which is very clear and spelled out in Torah. That the mitzvahs of the Torah remains as is forever. There's no change, there's no minimizing, no adding. The mitzvahs of the Torah remains in this number of 613. Which means when the Rambam counts the mitzvah 613, it's not only because of the general derech of the Rambam to itemize and then give numbers for everything that he mentions in his halachas. Here, as you see, the Rambam counts once and he counts again. These are the 613 because the Rambam is coming to stress that regarding mitzvahs minat Torah, it's set. This is the number al pi Torah that Hashem establishes, and there's no changes to this. When it comes to the mitzvahs midrabanan, though, the Rambam says that these are mitzvahs that were added. The Rabbanan with the koyach of Torah are able to add additional mitzvahs to strengthen Yiddishkeit and to change the world and to elevate the world. Wie der Rambam sagt in Hilchas HaMamrim, as the Rambam explains this in Hilchas Mamrim. Das heißt, sie sind in dem Hebech von einer bestimmten Zahl. These mitzvahs, Rambam doesn't give a number because it's the opposite of giving a set number that this is what it is and there's no change. Adarabah, the whole point is that Chachamim are adding for whatever purpose necessary. So therefore the Rambam cannot give any number for the mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. Kviyas mispar is shaykh nor by the mitzvahs d'Oraisa. When the Rambam gives the number for the mitzvahs minat Torah, it's to set that number, that this is what it is and it cannot change. Need by mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. And that's not true about mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, which is all the power of Torah that was given to the Chachamim to add whenever necessary to the mitzvahs of the Torah. Nachmer, furthermore, since there's an obligation that lies in the Chachamim to always add precautions to the Torah, B'lashon Rambam, as the Rambam writes, Lefi Masha Tzricha, according to what the time demands. Ken doch sein, as es kommen so it's possible that a time should come when es fordert sich zum Meisev sein, nach Geseres, Takanis, Menhagis, Mitzvahs der Rabbanan. There may be a time where it will be necessary for the Chachamim to add additional decrees or to institute other things and customs and even mitzvahs mit Rabbanan. Und demalt liegt auf the Chachamim Achiev zum Meisev sein. Und Achiev al Bnei Yisrael lekaiman. And then, if the time will demand this, Chachamim will have to add, and Yidden will have to fulfill these additional mitzvahs. The Haisafis mitzad leisasser on l'shmaya. They have to fulfill these additional mitzvahs of Chachamim because of the lav of leisasser and to listen to what Chachamim say. So therefore, it's not only that the idea of mitzvahs in the Rabbanan is to add and not a set amount of mitzvahs like it says in the Torah, but it's actually possible that they will have to add to the mitzvahs of the Torah at a time period that will demand this. Afapi as lepoil. Can it's nitzukumin keinayin mitzvahs derabanan. Although today we cannot add any more mitzvahs derabanan. Was is nitog kem bezdin agadol was sotem koyach zum meisav zayin takanas chulu, because we don't have the great bezdin that there was that added those mitzvahs in that time. So today, practically, this is not possible. So whatever mitzvahs are set, and it won't change. There are two answers to this. Erstens, the first point here is, does baitnit and geder for mitzvahs derabanan. The fact that practically it can't happen does not change how we define the mitzvahs derabanan. Vaibalt as al pi halacha is do an afsharis meisav zayin of the mitzvahs. Since there is a possibility to add to the mitzvahs, if there would be that great bezdin, or befrat losad love, especially after Mashiach comes, when Vashiva Shoftayach Kevarishayna, Hashem will return the great bezdin as it was originally. So then it maybe will be possible. But whether you could practically do this or not does not change what the essence and the nature of mitzvahs midrabanan are. That they are mitzvahs that in every time period, if necessary, you add. Chachamim are there to add more mitzvahs. The point made here is similar to what the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, and then Tam Havos HaRechen zwischen die Mitzvahs euch die Mitzvah von Hashmada sein umis. Why does the Rambam count amongst the mitzvahs the mitzvah of annihilating the 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael when Yidden came to conquer Eretz Yisrael? Aval Pias, this is not a mitzvah welch is neheges l'deiris, although this is not a mitzvah that is relevant in all generations. Was azelche mitzvahs rechnet nit der Rambam b'minyan mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that are only for a certain time period in history, but are not relevant in the future, the Rambam does not count them. But here, though, this mitzvah the Rambam does. And this is the Rambam's explanation. When you have something that was completed, that the goal was reached, even though the essence of that mitzvah is not really dependent on a certain time period. You cannot define this as a mitzvah that was for one time period and is not for all generations. Because in essence, this is a mitzvah that was not for one time period, it's a mitzvah for all times if there's a possibility to fulfill it. The point here is as follows. But what needs to be understood and to pay attention to here is looking at the essence of the mitzvah itself and how you're commanded to fulfill it. There's a mitzvah that in essence is a mitzvah for all time periods and all generations. But the way to fulfill the mitzvah, since the goal was reached in a certain generation, so therefore practically it won't be fulfilled in other generations. But in essence, the mitzvah is a mitzvah that was not ever set to be for one time period. So the same can be said here regarding mitzvahs midrabanan. Even though practically today is nidog the mitzvahs von azab bezdin was kem mechadash zana mitzvah. We don't have this bezdin that could add more mitzvahs. But nevertheless, you have the concept, the halacha and the mitzvah that there is. There is this concept that Hashem gives the koyach to chachamim in every generation to add to the mitzvahs midarabanan. So even if practically that goal was reached when there was the time of the Bezdin HaGadol, and later it won't happen again, but nevertheless, the concept doesn't change and exists in all times. V'hashenis, another point here is, Korav Loimar. It seems to be right to say, as Ladas HaRambam, that in the Rambam's opinion, Kenen B'poyel Nischadish Veren Takonis in Geder from Mitzvahs Derabanon, Oich Mitzvahs Nitokim Bezdin HaGadol. That according to the Rambam, you could add today additional institutions of the Chachamim that will be defined as new mitzvahs of the Chachamim, even when we don't have that great Bezdin. Based on what the Rambam writes in his introduction to Sefer Hayat. Everything that there is in the Gemara. All Yidden are commanded to follow this. We force all Yidden in every city, in every country, to follow all of the customs that are mentioned in the Gemara, and the things that they decreed, and whatever they instituted to follow them. Afal as the Bezdin HaGadol shel Shivim ve'echad, the great Bezdin, the Anshe Knesset Agdela of 71, or the Bezdin that there is in Yerushalayim, that is, the Bezdin in the Beis HaMikdash of 71, Batal Mikam Shonim Kaidim Chibur HaGemara. They did not exist many years before the Gemara was written. Hayol, and the reason is, why? Everything written in the Gemara must be followed by all Klal Yisrael. Since v'chol oisam advarim should be Gemara, because all of those things in Gemara, hiskimu aleim kol Yisrael, this was an agreement by all Yidden. V'oisam ha'chachamim shehiskinu she'gazru she'nhigu she'danu din v'lomdu she'mishpat kachu, and the chachamim in that time that instituted or taught or made this a custom for all Yidden to follow this, hem kol chachmi Yisrael oirubam chulu. These were all the sages of the time, or the majority of them. So from what the Rambam writes, so we can understand as atakane uminik. When it comes to anything instituted or a custom, v'seskimu aleim kol Yisrael, that all Yidden agree to this, habim b'chol azmanim, they're takeif from a mitzvah derabanan. In any time period, it has that power, like any mitzvah derabanan that the Chachamim added. So therefore, it's not dependent only on having the Bezdin HaGadol of 71 in the Beis HaMikdash. Even in the times of the Gemara, this is true, and it could be true in any other time period. The key is if this is something that all the Chachamim, or most of the Chachamim, and Klal Yisrael accepts this. And then to add, especially according to the Rambam's opinion, as is ken zayin, that it's possible that when hiskimu kol hachachamim shebe'eretz Yisrael lemanes dayanim v'lismei chaysam, that if all Chachamim will agree to appoint judges and to give them the proper smiche, that they should be properly ordained, as over a bezdin shel dayanim smuchim, that there should be a bezdin, that are judges that have the proper smiche, which is the same level of smiche as there was by Moshe Rabbeinu and the Chachamim, when there was an unbroken chain of ordaining the Chachamim, and that could be reinstituted when you have all the Chachamim that are going to ordain these Chachamim to have smicha, mit dem Teike from Bezdin HaGadol, and they have the same power to institute any takanis and halachas like the great Bezdin in the Beis HaMikdash. On der Chiyuv l'shmaya mikol Bezdin HaGadol, and the mitzvah to follow and listen to the Bezdin HaGadol is nit verbunden mit klal, mit dem was der Bezdin gefindt sich belishkas hagazes. In the Rambam's opinion, this is not necessarily only when you have the great Bezdin of 71 sitting in the lishkas hagazes in the Beis HaMikdash. This is a big discussion, as the Rabbi points here in the Haaretz. There's a big discussion about this, to bring back the smicha, to have the Bezdin with the full power properly. But in the Rambam's opinion, this is a possibility. And therefore, talking about adding to the mitzvahs midrabanan is not necessarily only something theoretical, but it's something that could actually be in practice if it's a time where it's necessary and you have that Bezdin HaGadol that all Chachamim and all Yidden will accept what's being instituted. So therefore, the Rambam cannot give any number for the mitzvahs. Adarabba, by not giving a number, he's giving you the definition of the difference between the mitzvahs minat Torah that are dafke set in their number, it's dafke not to be changed, and the mitzvahs midrabanan that could be changed. Avapi as bekamis svarim werden die mitzvahs derabanan gerechnet mit a mispa kavua. Although we do find in many svarim that the mitzvahs derabanan are counted with a specific number. Zayin mitzvahs derabanan, as mentioned before, the 7 mitzvahs that the Rabbanan instituted. Und der Mitzvah Zayin is b'diuk u'b'dafke, and this number is specifically 7. Ukiyidua as the Zayin mitzvahs the Rabbanan b'yachad mit the Tayag mitzvahs da'iraise 7 and the 630 mitzvahs minat Torah is the Mispar meduyek tarach. That's 620, which is Keser Torah, the crown of Torah. High time man, and therefore we find also a hint to this as the Aseres Adibris was koilem kol ha-Torah kula, the 10 commandments that include all of Torah, is in Zayda Tarach Oisius. There's 620 letters. Taryag Oisius B'chol Ois, so it's 613 letters. And each one of those letters, Nirsham, Mitzvah, Achas, Mitaryag Mitzvahs, it's a hint for one of these 613 mitzvahs. And then V'zayin Oisius Hayeseides, the additional 7 letters, Heim Zayim Mitzvahs D'Rabbanan, they hint to the additional 7 Mitzvahs D'Rabbanan, Kameshikosav HaKadmainim, as it's already said in earlier Sfarim about this. So we see that the number 7 is very specific. It brings us to the number of Tarach, Keser, and it's hinted in the Aseres Adibris. Is das Klal nit kinstire lahanal. This is not a contradiction to the point explained that the mitzvahs midrabanan are specifically not numbered and there could always be a change. So why is it in a contradiction? In the Sfarim that explain this, they're speaking about how it is in actuality. With a question mark. Possibly, also after Mashiach comes, it will not change. Was Milmaila is ausgestellt, as es wollen bepeil nicht sein mehr wie sheva mitzvahs der Rabbanan. From heaven, it's established that in actuality, there won't be more than 7. The Bezdin welche ken mechadish and meisu sein, vet mitzvahs nit mechadish sein bepeil. The Bezdin that could add more will at least mitzvahs will not add more, even if other kinds of gzeiris and precautions they will, but not more mitzvahs. Und zusammen mit die mitzvahs, der Reise, zene ze tarach, mitzvahs, keser. And therefore, together with the mitzvahs menatayre, you have the number of 620, which is keser. But on the other hand, though, mitzad them get there from mitzvahs derabanan al pi halacha, in order to define these mitzvahs from derabanan, the way it is from the standpoint of halacha, can it zukommen nach mitzvahs, there could be mitzvahs added, and any mitzvahs that will be added, the command not to go away or to follow what Chachamim say will apply to this as well. In the gather of halacha, the mitzvahs, midrabanan, there could always be anything that is necessary in the times to add to this. To explain this a little bit differently, the answer to this contradiction, that on one hand it remains 7 mitzvahs, but on the other hand we're saying that there always could be additions. Das was klapishmaya galya, the fact that it's revealed to heaven, as b'payel velen zayin no sheva mitzvahs derabanan, that in actuality there will be only 7 mitzvahs derabanan, is nit mishane klal das was al pi halacha kenen zukommen nach mitzvahs derabanan. It doesn't change the fact the way it is in halacha that there could be added more mitzvahs. The Yisayrim is that furthermore, v'balt as reshus l'chol adam nesuna, since every person has free choice. Ton hepachat Torah, to God forbid to do things opposite of Torah. Ken werden, it's possible, as the Bezdin darf mechuyev misaken sein ulahaisiv mitzvahs l'tzayda chasha, so it will be necessary because of the way people are behaving to add, and Chachama will be obligated to add 2 mitzvahs of Torah. And then you'll be obligated to fulfill them. So these 2 things are not a contradiction. The way it is Klapi Shmaya, the Eibishter that knows the future, and on the other hand, the Bechira that a person has in his behavior in this world, and therefore the necessity for Chachamim to add to Mitzvah Satayra are not a contradiction. An example for this is the general concept that the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva speaks about Hashem's knowledge, that He knows the future. As das was HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yidea, Kol Ma Sheyeh, the fact that Hashem knows everything that will be, is nit machriach to bechiras ha'adam. It's not a contradiction to this that a person has free choice. The actions of a person is his own, is in his hands, his choice. Every person has the free choice to choose to be a tzaddik or the opposite. Only the Rambam is Mevayer Baruch. The Rambam explains at length why this is not a contradiction, and the same applies here. That even if Klapishmaya Galya, that it's only 7, but yet, on the other hand, there's the Bechira of a person. And therefore, mitzad that, there could be a necessity to add more to the mitzvahs of the Torah. Apianal, based on this, as das was the Rambam, rechnet im Mispar von these mitzvahs der Rabbanon, that the reason why the Rambam does not count the number of the mitzvahs of Rabbanan is mitzad dem was al pi halacha haben ze nit ken minyan v'agbala, because in halacha these are mitzvahs that do not have a number and do not have a limitation. On the head of amadida v'agbala is al pi halacha halachas teires emes, the lack of any number and the lack of a limitation is the way it is properly defined according to the Torah. Yeshleimar, so we can say it now as das is masim. The emit was as mavur in Sfarim from Gedolei Yisrael as the mispa meduik from Sheva Misses the Rabbanon is mashlim the mispa tarach keser. So this goes along with this that was mentioned before, that it says in Sfarim of Gedolei Yisrael that the number 7 brings the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, to the number 620, which is keser, a crown. Al derech vi megefint b'negei halacha shebetayra di tzvei inyanim. Just like we find these 2 points regarding the halachas of Torah, that Chazal tell us halachas of Torah werden angerufen taga. The halachas of Torah are referred to as the crown of Torah, kisra shel Torah. Sie haben nicht kein Mispar. The halachas of Torah have no number. The details of all the halachas, you can't give them a number. Wie steht, va'alam is ein Mispar. And Chazal darshan al tikra alamis ela oilamis. Elo ha'halachis the less lein chushbena. This refers to all of the halachas of Torah that have no count. On ha b'ha talya. These 2 points, a crown and that has no count, go together. Mitzadem was halachas shebeteira. Zene verbunden mit keser, because the halachas of Torah are connected to this level of a crown. Zene zibeli mispar. Therefore, it's without a number. Bedugme via keser gashmi. Just like a crown physically, versus lamayla min reish, it's above the head. On is makiv dem reish, it surrounds the head. Was das weiß, as is hecher from the mention that resembles the fact that the crown is above the existence of the person. But on zusammen damit, but at the same time though, is a keser amiti dav zayin hoylem dem reish. A true crown is a crown that fits the head of the person. Al derech zeh is keser elyon, same also with the crown above, talking about the level of crown by Hashem that's expressed in this level of the halachas and these mitzvahs. Hecher from medida v'agbala. This is something which is above any number. On zusammen damit is a keser da'asiyah, the yitzire v'chulu. But at the same time, though, just like there's the keser of every individual world above spiritually, there's every keser of every individual level of mitzvahs. On the far zen and halachas was an kisser shel Torah on a cheshbon. So therefore, regarding the halachas of Torah, Chazal tell us that it's the crown of Torah, and it's also without any count. Those 2 points go together. So similar could be said also here, not exactly the same point, but similar could be said here, b'negeya the mitzvahs midivrei seifrim, regarding all mitzvahs midrabanan. This actually expresses what Torah Shebal Peh is all about, more than halachas in general. Halachas all the halachas are there to explain the details that are already in Torah Shebiksav. Here we're talking about a category of mitzvahs that were added, that are new. So zayin verbunden mit der Madrege von Keser, because these mitzvahs that Chachamim added are connected to the level of Keser, the crown of Torah, zenen ze beide beli minyan v'agbala. So therefore, they are both, the halachas of Torah and the mitzvahs of the Torah are without any number and without any limitation. Although when it comes to the fulfillment of these mitzvahs that Chachamim added, the way they're practically fulfilled in the world, and also their number, which there is a number of 7, as far as the level of Torah that relates to the existence of the world. And that aspect of Torah is farana agbala b'mitzvah seilu, zay mitzvahs derabanan. There is a limitation, a specific limited amount of mitzvahs, the 7 mitzvahs derabanan. V'zeshtein over in halachas haTorah, however, as they are in their source, being halachas of Torah, ubemela b'sefer Rambam shehu halachas, and therefore this is also expressed in the Rambam sefer, which is halachas. Kumtzu a chiddush gadol b'lashon Rambam atzmei kanal. So there is a great chiddush here that Chachamim can add in Torah, as the Rambam himself expresses, Reish Siv Beis, as brought before in the beginning of Siv Beis, as there's an oile on la'alofim rabim, that they go higher, they're above, and they come to the number of thousands. B'payil. In actuality, there could be many thousands of mitzvahs that they add, l'mayla mimedida v'agbala, above any limitation at all. Be'erach hamispa d'sheva, when you compare it to the number, the thousands is unlimited when you compare it to the number of 7. Because this is the source of what the mitzvahs midrabanan are. They come from the level of keser, a crown that's above, that's higher than any limitation, and therefore the mitzvahs are actually above limitation. And through learning all the halachas in general, was werden angerufen Tagav v'Kistra shel Torah, that are referred to as the crown of Torah, is kol hashayna halachas b'chol yom, one that learns halachas every day. Muftach loy, he is guaranteed shehu ben olam haba, that he will have a portion in the world to come.